The ambulance's roar was loud outside the city hospital. The vehicle hadn't turned off the engine yet. The emergency room door had already opened to let the patient in. 4 nurses rushed in at an unbelievable speed. The little boy was in the middle. The handle was pushed inside. Its entire body was torn as if it had thousands of horizontal cuts all over it. The shirt on its body was still tattered. His mouth had to breathe oxygen, and now he was on the brink of life and death. The nurses called each other. Even though it was urgent, they still had to be careful, but everyone could see that this kid's condition was that he wouldn't have much longer to live. The police escorting the ambulance stopped outside, not knowing what to say to each other. The radio in the car heard the officer's voice. The suspects included 6 male students and 2 female students, asking to verify their identities. A moment later, another voice responded. According to witness testimony, the group of suspects consisted of 8 people wearing the uniform of Nunguang High School. That was the uniform of Nunguang High School, meaning that middle school boy was arrested. Beaten to death by a bunch of other middle school kids? The black-shirted police officer was furious, punched straight in front of the steering wheel and cursed. If it was that serious, it wasn't just a case of school violence. The boy almost lost his life. They immediately knew this would be troublesome. Then told each other and quickly arrested the other guys. But this is going to be troublesome. The journalists will definitely make a fuss. Rubbing the top of his eyes with a painful expression, he agreed to leave, stating that the 2 of us must handle this case. The blood of that middle school boy is still scattered on the floor outside the hospital. And he is now sinking deep into a coma, feeling like he is under a vast ocean, separating himself from the outside. Completely outside. It remained in a daze like that until it heard a call, "Say Young." The call sounded somewhat urgent, mixed with pain, forcing it to open its eyes. Its vision gradually became clearer. When it recognized the person in front of me looked very familiar. The woman kept calling "Say Young," then reached out to squeeze his hand, rubbing his head in a friendly manner. "You're awake, is it, Auntie?" Not hearing a response from the skinny boy, no different from a dry corpse lying on the bed, she repeated, "It's Auntie, do you recognize her, Say Young?" "Is that Aunt?" His head was fragmented, like it was floating, trying to put it back together. Say Young secretly thought that Ri had gone abroad to get married, but his eyes felt terribly tired, wondering where this was. Then the dark shadows before him. "What's wrong with my face? Isn't it the 8 bastards who beat me to this point?" The flash of memories was enough to make Say Young's skinny body feel like it was about to sink into a deep sea of pain. He couldn't cry out, his eyes kept rolling back and his whole body convulsed in terror like he was having an epileptic seizure. "His aunt just called you, Say Young." She was so panicked that the little boy kept jerking. Finally, when the doctor rushed into the room and saw that Say Young's condition was as critical as having a seizure, he quickly pulled out a needle filled with a sedative. He writhed in such pain until his body felt more comfortable before stopping, taking a few difficult breaths. The veins on his arm were broken. He was stabbed with mucus, the result of passing the solution to keep him alive too many times, but this time because he woke up, he felt unbearable pain. His vision gradually closed when he saw Auntie eagerly asking, "Say Young, will my grandchild wake up?" Then heard the doctor say the boy would fall asleep again after injecting the sedative. His aunt became even more worried. Did the boy just wake up and then fall into a coma again? Before her eyes closed completely, Say Young heard her aunt's voice tremble. "I'm sorry, doctor. It's because the boy has been in a coma for 9 months that I'm so worried." His vision was dark, but his subconscious he was still wondering, have I been in a coma for 9 months? Why is it so much? The next morning, while peeling fruit, she told the boy lying on the bed that it was as if he had died. "My father was dead. I thought I would never wake up again. My mother always begged me not to give up." Both parents said they absolutely would not forgive those damned people. They would definitely make them pay. Speaking of which, suddenly Aunt Say Young trembled violently. He clearly saw that Auntie was angry but couldn't answer. She just tilted her head to one side, tears streaming down her chapped mouth. Auntie's voice still rings steadily in my ears, accusing my parents of filing a lawsuit and doing everything they can. Reaching out to wipe away the poor nephew's tears, Auntie trembled as she recounted, At that time, the police and prosecutors both advised reconciliation, but my parents absolutely refused. My father's only wish was to make those bastards angry. That pays the price. And the result is really unacceptable. It's Auntie and she can't accept it anymore. He stopped crying but just lay there listening to the next part. I ended up like this because of those 8 children. They say they only need to pay a few tens of millions of won in compensation and that's it. They've just been suspended from school. That's so angry. My parents were originally calm people, but since then they started to change. They printed flyers everywhere, posted articles on forums. They asked all their relatives to sign the petition. Unjustly let everyone know their crimes. Just a few sentences like that make it clear how parents had to be alone and begging for public attention. According to Auntie, but no one knows, no one can know. The forum post that was just posted has been taken down. There isn't a single article or news segment reporting on the case. The police don't have enough authority. The prosecutor doesn't care, all of that. Anyone who wanted to help us was fired or transferred. At that time, my father also knew that the parents of those bastards were all powerful people, and that the police, prosecutors, and reporters were just puppets in their hands. His aunt was trembling and trying to hold back her sobbing. She told him that while he was still in a coma, he didn't know when he would wake up and the other kids would be able to go back to school, and how much his parents had suffered. Speaking of this, Auntie covered her face and sobbed. So my father, doused himself in gasoline and burned himself on Wannamun Square. My older sister, Auntie, my mother, stood in front of my father wearing a protest sign around her neck. Before hearing what happened next, Se Young's eyes opened. He didn't want to hear it, but he still had to hear the next part, that my mother was screaming and complaining, pointing at my father who was burning himself and begging them not to ignore it. Begging them to listen. Tears welled up in his eyes and next to his hand was Auntie's panicked voice calling out to Se Young. Her grandson, who was already as thin as dry dew, was now dripping with snot and tears like a rushing waterfall. He withdrew repeatedly, opened his mouth and screamed, silently praying that he was just sleeping, that it was all just a dream. After waking up again, there were still only Se Young and Aunt sitting next to her. He wanted to hear his aunt tell him everything after that. But then Se Young herself realized she couldn't do anything, because her parents had to burn their lives in exchange for justice for her. Looking back at the video recorded by passers-by, he saw his father set himself on fire, then his mother also rushed at him with her father's burning body. Then the funeral was held. It's been 2 months since they were both buried, but he just kept sleeping here. Seeing my nephew's silent and desperate look, Aunt Se Young immediately screamed, "Those bastards have already paid the price. No one can escape their crime. All 8 of them have to go to the reformatory." Aunt Se Young's face had a strange smile on her face as she told the police, prosecutors and even journalists that they were scrambling to blame each other. The Special Investigation Team and Interdisciplinary Investigation Team all got involved, causing public opinion to rise. At that point, the smile suddenly disappeared from Auntie's face. She turned away and whispered the last words. They were very angry. Both Auntie and Se Young knew what happened next was not as expected. Because initially those rebels received a sentence of 6 months in a reformatory, but because of public opinion and the online community's anger, the sentence was increased to 10 months, then 1 year and finally to a 2-year sentence. The school director, 4 principals and homeroom teachers were all dismissed, and in the end, the parents of those bastards had to hold a press conference to publicly apologize to all the people. But public opinion does not ignore it so easily. They shared the clip of my parents' self-immolation so that those bastards who were still healthy could see that horrible and cruel scene. Views increased dramatically to more than 7 million. While Se Young was still in a coma, the president also visited, and many media were interested in demanding justice for him. But no matter what, now when she wakes up and returns to the real world, Se Young is still a normal person, without anything in her hands, not even her parents. After a while, in front of Se Young's mansion were 2 people shaking hands after successfully signing a real estate contract. The guy wearing a suit told the curly-haired lady that the rent should be transferred to her account every 2nd day of every month. If you have any problems, just contact our brokerage office. The curly-haired lady laughed and said, We've signed the contract. Since I've moved here, I can talk to the landlord at any time. The broker's extremely commercial smile suddenly disappeared from his lips, and suddenly his voice sounded like he was threatening. No, please don't do that. The landlord has authorized us to solve the problem. Resolve all related issues until the contract ends, so please contact us directly. The aunt also wanted to say more. Anyway, I should say hello to the homeowner when I come here, but seeing the broker's determined and decisive look, he used the excuse that the homeowner doesn't like meeting strangers. The aunt was still surprised but wanted to ask more, so the broker raised his index finger and told her one more thing. By the way, this is not a suggestion but a warning. Pointing up, he said, the owner of this building is in the attic room on the rooftop. That's the strangest thing I've ever seen. I've heard that normally the attic room is the cheapest room in the whole building. He did not explain anything further, simply warned that she was not allowed to use the terrace under any circumstances, nor could she arbitrarily enter or exit the terrace. Anyway, there was an iron door on the stairs leading to the 5th floor terrace. It was locked so she couldn't get up there. Every word he said was incredibly tense. Seeing the woman in front of him wanted to defend himself. He took 2 steps forward, no different from a debt collector, and asked in a harsh voice, "Do you find it inconvenient? If you find it inconvenient, we can cancel the contract now. If you have any more questions, just say so." Quote. Standing in front of the broker who had just gently shook hands with her, she felt stunned and then hesitantly said it was nothing. His expression looked so gloomy, but in an instant it changed to his usual gentle and kind smile, wished her everything well and asked permission to leave immediately. What the broker said was not wrong. The owner of this Young building actually lives in the attic. He used his hand to click the mouse in the dark room, with only one light source coming from the screen. Spotting several large garbage bags tied up in the corners of the room, Young clattered on the computer. All of them were the last names of the people who had beaten her to this point. The first is Shinjin Group, ranked 2nd in the country's financial sector, having been very active in this field for the past 5 years, and will soon reach 1st rank. Shinjin Group also has a very cool brand phrase. We want for a better world to bring happiness to people. The purpose of our business is to surround everyone. Next, he searched for the name Jang Sung Chal and saw the latest information that he had resigned as director of his Barun's law firm due to his daughter's involvement in a school scandal. The next names, such as former court judge Jang Yonghu, only showed general information about life, family and politics, nothing outstanding. He knocked through Blue Wing Media again and saw that they were still doing business as usual. 2 years ago, the chairman's daughter was caught up in a school violence scandal that caused frustration, but then they turned this scandal into a powerful promotional success for themselves. The 5th player on the list is Goodfield Group, one of the first electronic information portals in Korea. Although they have had accusations of monopoly, their business in general has not been affected at all. He read and reread the news about the lives of the family who bullied him like that, not sure how much time had passed until the phone on the floor vibrated. It informed that the property had received the rent money into your account, but Young just glanced at it and went back to continuing to search for things online without paying any attention. Not a few seconds later, the phone rang again. This time it was an incoming call. He felt extremely annoyed, glanced in that direction with a dazed look, still did not pick up the phone but read the message from the number he had just called. Who was it? It said it would arrive in 10 minutes. At that moment, Young turned off the computer, slowly pushed the chair that was blocking her feet to the ground, and saw her metal door as if it had been rammed in from the outside by a monster, making a terrible noise. He was not startled, on the contrary, he only felt alert, slowly walking towards the door where a woman's urgent voice was heard along with her laughing voice outside. She had written wrongly for a moment. It turned out to be 10 minutes. He did not show any attitude but looked outside with disgusted eyes. Then the silhouette of a woman printed there was silent for a moment, listening to the rattling sound of metal hitting each other inside. Young's tousled hair was revealed. As soon as she opened her eyes, the sunlight shone directly into her eyes, making her vision of the sky turn white. He raised his hand to cover it, but before his eyes could adjust, he saw the woman's silhouette quickly sneaking straight into the house. As she walked inside, she grumbled, it was so cold, if the owner of the building lived in the attic room, she wouldn't have lived here for a long time. He glanced at her then slammed the door. His mouth went inside the house and still said, "Hey Se-young. At home, turn on the light. Do you want to go blind or something?" He turned on the light as she said, but the whole room had only one light bulb in the middle. At this point, I could clearly see that the landscape in the room for one person was littered with trash bags, stretching from the door to the bed without a single blanket. No Nas grumbled, hey, live like a human, what the heck is this? Se-young said it as if it was nothing, but she just seemed to grumble, not forcing him to clean up or not. What? Holding up the documents in his hand, he said, today I have an appointment for a blind date, so we'll check it out quickly, neither agreeing nor refusing. Se-young just turned a careless face towards her, asking about her arms, legs, hips, eyes and headaches. Se-young kept saying it was a bit uncomfortable. Every time I asked him, he said a bit uncomfortable and looked very vague, mainly because his eyes were still looking at the dense lines of cuz running on the screen. Looking up there, he looked at the phone in his hand, then took it to the nurse who was happily writing on the document in her hand. Now that his blood pressure had dropped to 140/100ths, No-Na sighed and told Se-young what to do and what not to do. She also informed him that 2 years had passed, and everyone was tolerant to some degree. But no matter what she said, there was no sign that Se-young had heard. She rolled her eyes to attract attention while the boy in front of her kept tapping on the screen continuously. A moment later, she felt her phone vibrate. No-Nas took it out to look at it. She didn't know what she saw, but her eyes were clearly unhappy. Standing up and screaming in Se-young's face, "Hey, did you mention money yet? Are you really good now or what?" Se-young still didn't answer, looking at her with indifferent eyes. That expression of his made people want to go crazy. Walking calmly on the wooden floor, knowing clearly that Se-young didn't listen but still had to remind, from now on don't do that anymore. Go to school or not, you have to go out and meet people. Still not receiving any response from Se-young, she just opened the door and went out. He heard the squeaking sound of the hinges gradually closing and then sat with his knees in front of the screen. Plugging in the phone charger from the computer's source, the first image that appeared was the happy family when I was young and my parents were still alive. He clicked on the purple icon above, seeing it pop up like a specially installed software. Se-young raised his hand to scroll through the social network, wanting to click to see some posts and immediately saw the message, "No. I can't see it because I'm not a friend. The post is in restricted viewing mode so I can't open it." Lifting her head to look at the still lit screen, there was only a red question mark in the middle of the green screen. When she clicked on it, a series of tables with a long cuz line appeared before Se-young's eyes. He looked up at it for a while, then looked down at the phone in his hand, and finally saw that the post opened was a series of messages back and forth from the group of people who beat him to death. At first it was just a few idle questions, then they talked about something related to going abroad and returning to the country. A guy named Soo-yun in there told him to keep his mouth shut. He had to keep it a secret in the group. Because his father had told him to get in front of the director of the National Tax Department this time, he couldn't let any scandals involve him. Remind a few more people in the group not to reveal that the 6 of us are preparing to go to America. They didn't reveal where the other 2 were, they seemed more secretive than the others. Even if someone in the group asked, they didn't answer. In general, they still had a very good life. Se-young put the phone face down, stood frozen in front of the computer screen, gritted his teeth with a look of unwillingness, then somehow moved back to the corner of the room. He jumped onto the empty bed and laid down on his back. Let the upper half of your body stretch out under the sunlight coming from the glass window. Desperate or miserable, Se-young didn't know. He had been doing these things over and over again for nearly 2 years. Each time he felt he couldn't accept it and just closed his eyes and let it all pass. There is no way to know that out of the area where you live, out of the Earth with billions of people on the blue planet constantly revolving around itself and around the sun, is something that is launching at breakneck speed. It spread streaks of light into space as if a meteorite had just passed through space, but when Tom used the shop telescope to look more closely, He discovered that the thing did not have the shape of a rock, but it very much resembled a rock. A sword rushing from outer space. How the hell did it go straight into the rooftop of Se-young's building, explode with a bang and leave a huge column of smoke? The person lying in the attic room like him felt the strongest vibration. No matter how indifferent the young man was, he sat up immediately. But the surrounding space was so quiet, like the noise from before was just a dream. Se-young wondered what had just happened. The noise just now didn't come from below. He took 2 aimless steps around the bed thinking, like something fell from above his head. So he slowly walked back to the door and stood still thinking, maybe it was a thief. Otherwise who? No. Maybe those 8 damn guys came to me. Knowing clearly that they are living a normal life, Se-young still feels like they are ghosts chasing her forever. Thinking about that made his heart ache so much that he had to reach out and clasp his chest, trying to take a few deep breaths to try not to faint. Se-young used her trembling right hand to squeeze tightly. He squinted his eyes to give himself the motivation to walk step by step to the metal door with many different types of zippers attached. Opening each one from top to bottom and then opening the electronic lock on the handle. For some reason Se-young felt so scared that his throat felt dry. Finally, still turning the doorknob, he pushed the metal door out and saw that the light coming from there was not quite like sunlight. She still had to put her hand to cover the light source, but it was too strong. For a moment, Se-young was shocked to realize that the bright light source was not from the sun, but the thing that was emitting sparkling light was a sword. 100% authentic, with the shank tied with a piece of red cloth that looks ancient. That thing was plugged into the floor of the terrace, causing several long cracks, and also ignited a blazing fire. Any way you look at it, it looks illusory, but why did a sword appear here? It was clearly still daytime, so there was no way Southeast Young was night blind. He took 2 more steps to get closer to the sword, stared at it with his eyes, trying to guess why there was a sword here. But the most important thing is who and why is it here? His room is in the attic. There must be some force to stick this sword into the ground, right? Thinking she was going crazy, Se-young shook her sweaty head, raised her hand to cover her eyes, then opened them and saw them there. He then took a few steps closer, only to realize that he could see the sword clearly, partly because of its extremely outstanding appearance. This is a type of sword that often appears in games, but what is its name? Is it a hand sword or a two-hander sword? In general, I don't know, but why is the sword so tall? For a young man who is only 1.58 meters tall like him, this sword is likely taller than a head. Walking around this thing with a suspicious appearance, Se-young thought to himself that I was the only one who saw it plugged down here, but it was a bit tight. The rooftop had a few cracks and the most important question was who put it down here? Turning around the only path that could lead to the terrace, Se-young clearly saw that the staircase door was still locked. So who planted this sword here and for what purpose? The more he thought about it, the more messy his head became. If your body wants to burn, how is important? Unable to figure out who or how, he got confused and shouted a few times, causing the old women in the neighborhood to raise their heads and look up, thinking that a strange animal had appeared. Se-young couldn't keep calm anymore. He grabbed his head and scratched it, roaring, "Give it up! Give it up! Give it up! I told you I don't know." Screaming tiredly, he was panting again. "Okay. No, if you're curious, there's no need to wonder." He turned around and went into the room to close the door. He didn't know where the sword came from, nor did he know who had planted it. But my room inside here is not affected, so the legend of the sword Excalibur suddenly appearing on the rooftop is nothing to me. Lying down on the empty bed as if she had just gone through something very tiring, Se-young was sweating profusely, closing her eyes and silently telling herself she wouldn't care about that. He slept like that until it started to get dark, still snoring. That sword was ignored all day long. Suddenly, there were thumping sounds, then like the sound of battle gongs or something. The rooftop shook violently, creating shockwaves that spread to Se-young's room, waking him up from a deep dream. Being suddenly pulled out of her sleep, Se-young felt her heart beating fiercely with each horn sound, and the scene before her eyes was so strange. He saw hundreds of people tapping their spears on the ground and standing solemnly in thick armor. Opening his eyes, Se-young discovered that he was standing in the middle of rows of identical soldiers like models in a display area. The loud noise accompanied by the sound of a horn made the young man turn around and start looking everywhere. Find out where the source is coming from. Then his eyes widened in horror as he saw a flock of what looked like both birds and insects, flying in the sky. On the ground in front of them are huge giants with 2 arms stomping on the ground, stepping over small citadels that only reach their knees, approaching where the army is standing, led by a man wearing the red robe covers all the way to the heels. That person brandished a sword with a yellow hilt that looked very familiar. That sword was as tall as in Se-young's memory, taller than the other man, but he held it very easily. He squinted his eyes to focus on that thing, trying to understand what everything that was happening here meant. Suddenly, the wind suddenly hit his mouth like he was riding a roller coaster. Se-young stood still in that place. It felt like a million rays of light had just rushed through my awareness. His mouth seemed to be extremely stretched backwards, and he had to brace himself to endure for a while. Suddenly everything disappeared. He leaned forward, panting, then lazily opened his eyes, looking straight at the place where the sword in the hand of the cloaked brother from before should have been. Now it was extremely surprising to see it planted on a pile of corpses filled with all kinds of people and strange beasts, and the ground was littered with sparks of fire. Se-young saw it and was extremely frightened. It was clear that the sword stuck in was no different from the one on his rooftop, but he kept staring like that until he realized he was sitting on his bed. Blanket refused to look into nothingness. The image disappeared in an instant, leaving behind a very familiar room, causing Se-young to pause for a few seconds. He bent down and covered his face, wondering if it was a dream or something. The noise outside seemed to be urgently asking him to come here. The continuous thumping sounds were from the terrace outside, nothing else. Sweat pouring down his face again, the young man wondered what the hell was happening. Then he jumped out of bed, telling himself it wasn't a dream. Se-young was very scared, feeling like behind that door was a ghost waiting, but it kept urging, in case he ignored it, its sound would suddenly disappear. Opening a series of locks on the metal door again, Se-young opened her eyes and looked out, still seeing a strange light shining from there, but this time it was so strange that the young man had to slam the door, not believing it. Okay, are you kidding me? He opened the door and looked back again, discovering that the sword was burning brighter than the temple fire. What the hell could a sword burn on its own like that? It wasn't just the sword that was burning but the whole terrace of the temple. Se-young burning, the fire spread everywhere, leaving only 1 meter around his room door. The terrace had now turned into a sea of fire. Wanting to take a few more steps was extremely difficult. Making a quick decision, Se-young turned back to her room and ran into the bathroom, where there was already a basin of water. Knowing when he had been released, he firmly grabbed the edge of the pot and pulled it up with all his youthful strength. But it didn't work. No matter how much I leaned forward, the pot still wouldn't budge. It was clear that the little muscles in my body had no effect. Just pour some out, no need to try. He was finally able to lift the water basin, rushed towards the burning sword right in front of his room, used all his strength, aimed at it and threw it towards the sword. However, the amount of water that Se-young could carry was less than a spider's urine. As soon as it touched the top of the fire, it immediately caught fire. He cursed loudly, then picked up the red pot and rushed back into the house, screaming and screaming like that, another 30 or 40 rounds like that, and finally the young man was panting and sitting on the ground in the middle of the terrace where he was loading. Foggy smoke. Looking down at her trembling hands due to using too much force, Se-young felt like she was completely exhausted. He thought about something then stood up, but unexpectedly the bones in his back creaked like an old man because he hadn't moved for too long, causing him to feel so much pain that he could leave. I trembled for a while before realizing that the green thing on the right, so beautiful and neat, was actually an unused water faucet. Se-young felt so stupid. Why didn't he say that from the beginning? Why didn't he use this to put out the fire from the beginning? The clock ticked gradually until 12 o'clock, and then when it hit exactly 12 o'clock, Se-young was pulled out of her dozing sleep by resounding sounds, so familiar that she was no longer sad and dirty. Se-young sat up on her bed, stretched her legs, and yawned. She still felt drowsy but was able to crawl to the metal door. When she opened it, she saw a blazing fire. A few dots of light scattered in the air. He put his hands in his pockets, walked closer to the water valve with the pipe already plugged into its mouth, glanced at the fire surrounding the sword, saw nothing strange. The past 4 days were enough for him to get used to it. He turned on the faucet, pointed the pipe in that direction, then sprayed water straight at the tip of the sword stuck on the rooftop like watering a plant. He wondered clearly that when he woke up, he heard a sound that sounded like an anti-lock ringing. Where did it come from, and why did this sword catch fire? Looking up again to see the burning sword without the red cloth behind it being burned, there were many questions about this thing that Se-young could not know the answer to. Another day passed. When the clock just struck 12 o'clock, the noises that seemed to stop continuously urged Se-young. This time he did not feel drowsy but felt angry when he was pulled out of his sleep. Then sat up and roared and cursed. "Fuck you guys, let me sleep a little, I want to sleep." He was angry, he wanted to go crazy. So the next day when the clock had not yet reached 12 o'clock, Se-young was no longer in his room. His room was still cluttered with dark black trash bags. But the owner was staring at the red and yellow sword that looked like a fairground. This time, he brought a chair from his room and sat facing the sword. He waited until 12 o'clock had just struck. He immediately saw the blocking sounds coming from the sword in front of him. It was real, it happened. That's true. The young man tightened his grip on the water pipe in his hand and saw that the ground below where the sword was inserted began to emit sparks of fire. He sprayed a stream of water onto the sword, extinguishing the fire that had just begun. Unexpectedly, as soon as he stopped spraying water, the flames flared up again. He sprayed again and saw the water flowing. On the sword, Se-young smiled and thought, this should be the end. After a while, he thought he had finished solving the problem outside. Se-young returned to his room and typed on the computer again. He moved the mouse and sat in front of the glowing screen, searching for a while, feeling like I've found the solution myself. Turning back to face the sword, Se-young pretended to be extremely serious. Then just as it rang out with rumbling sounds and fire was about to spread, Se-young's eyes were full of determination. One hand water spray bottle, with the other hand pulling out a cross made from disposable chopsticks. He held out his homemade crossbar and mumbled, in the names of Father and Son, saying all kinds of prayers. Amen balasabua. Finished. Right when the small flame appeared on the sword, he immediately sprayed a bottle of homemade clear water and waited. Within 2 seconds, the fire broke out more intensely than usual as if protesting Se-young's exorcism, causing him to hastily retreat. Screaming all kinds of things, he turned around again. Exorcised the devil with all the power God gave me, he screamed loudly, and the Satan quickly disappeared. Just like that, I don't know how much time has passed. Se-young sees that the amount of water emitted from his spray bottle is not as much as the sweat pouring under the sun. He mumbles something in the name of God. I command this and that. With an extremely exhausted appearance. The sword did not react at all, allowing him to continue mumbling, I expel you, devil. Then he felt like he was crazy, so he threw all the things in his hand away. Cursed all of you. Then hugged his messy head and gasped for air. When morning comes, the fire will go out. Just now it was still burning brightly but now it's gone. Looking up at the sky above, he felt terribly tired. Was this night going to continue like this? It can't be like that, it's been almost a week. Se-young resolutely looked at the thing in front of him with his hands clenched. He made an extremely bold decision. Today I will fight you. If you want to fight, you must have tools. Se-young can't find a box full of repair tools in the building. He grabbed a hammer with a wooden handle that looked quite sturdy, held it out and thought for a while, then gritted his teeth and smiled mischievously, thinking, that damn sword. I'll beat you with this. He held it a bit to get used to it, then exhaled like he was whistling, half like challenging the sword in front of him, then took 2 or 3 quick steps, accelerating his body to rush towards the sword. Se-young swung his hand and swung the hammer forward, its metal tip hitting the sword's hilt with a resounding clang. He saw something shoot out, not far from his head, and hit the brick wall behind him. My back made a loud noise, like two hard objects colliding. Before realizing what that thing was, Se-young saw that his right arm had become lighter, the head of the hammer had been thrown off the wooden handle, pinned on the brick wall behind him. He looked at that thing, then looked at the sword. What the hell is in front of me? Why is this so strange? Unwilling, he gritted his teeth and turned back into his room at the fastest speed possible. The young man jingled something inside for a while, then seemed to have found what he wanted. There was no more noise inside. When Se-young returned to the rooftop, his appearance seemed more stable than before. It turned out that in the young man's hand he had a baseball bat made from beautifully painted blue metal. He was full of determination, looking at the sword like his enemy. Although his weak arm holding up the baseball bat seemed to tremble, Se-young just rushed straight towards the sword with the baseball bat in hand. He slammed this thing into the handle and heard a clanging sound. Then while the young man was still using his strength, the ball of the stick's tip was shot back. I suddenly saw the familiar blue light rushing towards my face. It hit Se-young in the face and then turned 360 degrees up to the roof, leaving the owner with his head in a lump and falling. He collapsed onto the rooftop floor in pain. I have endured many pains in life, but this is one of the pains I don't want to endure the most. He kept holding his boredom like that until it hurt so much that he cried. He gritted his teeth in all sorts of ways and then sat up, cursing his boredom. Damn the sword. I won't give up. He was so angry, he couldn't bear it anymore. He reached out and grabbed the hilt of the sword, wanting to lift it up. Suddenly he heard his heart pounding when his hands touched the huge hilt, but now he cared. No matter what, there will only be one winner today. As soon as he lifted the sword, Se-young heard the sounds of crackling and vibrations from under his feet transmitted to his brain. The rooftop ground echoed with the roar of fire, creeping through the cracks. It suddenly occurred. Flared up into giant flames higher than Se-young's head. He looked around and cursed. Damn it, why is it on fire again? It's clearly been less than 12 o'clock and it's already on fire like this. Se-young didn't know what to do. His hand still didn't leave the handle. Sword. When he turned around again, he saw that the light was not fire shining on his face, but it was a giant sphere that looked like the sun, gathered by that fire about 5 meters above his head, moving. Burning brightly. If you look again and again, you can see that the ball is absorbing all the fire on the rooftop, gathering it to its own size. Se-young just stared blankly and then the ball hit her in the head without any resistance. It was like a rain of fire penetrating every cell, every pore, even Se-young's eyes, nose, and mouth, rushing in that direction and causing the skin to flow with strange veins that were unlike her own. People often have it. Following his painful screams, all the fragmented memories seemed to be pulled into a single thread, both like memories and like images, some strange and some familiar. Se-young felt his head hurt like a hammer. It felt like the two hemispheres of his brain wanted to split in half. A few images like memories flashed through his head, and then strange emotions that were not like his own. The body is tearing his consciousness apart. He screamed in pain until the light gradually decreased in intensity, becoming a few small rays in the air, when the fire disappeared, leaving only smoke. The tip of the sword, following Se-young's strength, bounced off the ground. Following his momentum, he fell backwards. The young man gasped for air, his mouth flowing slowly, but in his hand he finally grasped the handle of the sword. It seemed he had succeeded. It's a success. Lying on the rooftop, Se-young heard people whispering. Why is it so noisy on the rooftop these days? You on the 3rd floor also heard it. Early this morning there was some screaming for about 2 to 3 hours. My whole family couldn't sleep. The aunts added in agreement. Oh my God, if you're still like that on the 4th floor, people like us who live on the 5th floor are about to die. We don't know what to do, but we keep banging on the floor like that. The lady in the blue shirt said in a low voice, my husband doesn't feel angry, but feels miraculous. They suddenly became whispers, because none of us have met the homeowner yet. The guy who lives on the 5th floor said he's been renting a house here for nearly 2 years, right, but he's never met the landlord. The lady on the 5th floor nodded and said yes. Up to now I still don't know if the homeowner is a man or a woman, an old woman or a prostitute. This morning I also contacted the broker's manager and told him there had been screaming for the past few days and I had to call the police. Explaining clearly like that, the other people were curious and asked, "What did he say?" He said that screaming all day and night won't cause any human-related problems to happen, so there's no need to call the police. The women responded in bewilderment like that, they had no responsibility at all. Well, he said he would contact the homeowner himself to ask for clarification and told us to wait until then, because everyone knows the homeowner is the one who lives in the attic. The legendary homeowner was now lying on his back on the terrace, moaning like a dog about to go crazy. Then he opened his mouth and screamed as if someone had stuck a hand in his ass. Screaming in frustration, he realized no one had done anything to him. Tan Nien sat up and rubbed his aching head, silently asking what he had seen. Was it a dream or something? If it was a dream, then why so real? Squeezing his face, Se Young felt like it was a memory with emotions, making him feel like his heart was aching. It had both joy and pain, despair, and a little excitement and sadness. And hatred. All the emotions I received were extremely genuine and were feelings that had been repressed for a long time, so long that it was unimaginable. But how did he know why that happened? Shaking his head as if he wanted to get rid of those questions, Se Young clenched his hands and tried to stand up. Suddenly he felt something in his right hand. He was startled to realize that what was in his right palm was the hilt of that giant sword. Looking at it and then back at herself, Se Young couldn't remember why she was holding it in her hand. He was scared to death, as if he had just grabbed the girl's chest and immediately let it go and looked around, as if he was afraid that people would see him holding the sword. Oh look, the sword is here, which means it has been pulled out and the mark where the sword was stuck in the ground has disappeared. It was as if nothing had ever happened, and from this angle Se Young discovered that the sword was about 1 meter longer than when it was stuck in the ground. It's so long but it doesn't penetrate the ceiling downstairs. It's really magical. I don't know what I'm thinking. Tan Nien tried his best to lift the sword like he was lifting a piece of concrete. His body trembled. I was able to push it to a crooked angle. This sword has a handle on the blade that seems to be used to make rickets and malnourished children like Se Young grabbed it, but he still didn't have enough strength. His arm trembled, causing the sword to fall on him. As expected, he couldn't bear the weight. Se Young was pressed by it like a wooden bar across his body, feeling paralyzed. It was like he wanted to fly to the moon. After struggling for a while, he was able to hang the sword higher than his room near the door, then propped himself up on his hands, breathing heavily, vomiting all kinds of things because he used too much strength, then looked at the damn sword again. Se Young didn't know what to do, so he stood there with a blank expression for a moment, then raised his right hand to rub the shiny blade that looked like it had been cleaned every day. Suddenly, the 4 words "long sword of fighting" rang out in his head. I pulled my hand back. Isn't this the name of the sword? Then 4 other words suddenly jumped out of Se Young's head. Loi Vu practitioner. This is not the real name of the sword, but someone arbitrarily named it like this. So, he squeezed his chest again, wondering what was wrong with him, knowing those things. Suddenly there was a voice whispering in his mind. His spirit and will to fight did not allow himself to tremble in fear of anyone. Anything. Don't bow your head and don't back down. So the young man raised his head, used both hands to grab a part of the sword, then grabbed it, leaned forward and pulled it out of the wall. Just then, Se Young gasped again. He lowered the tip of the sword and dragged it on the rooftop to reduce the burden, then closed his eyes tightly and thought about the technique of using the sword that automatically appeared in his mind. He imitated what he felt in his mind and immediately followed suit, from how to swing the sword, how to hold it, to how to cut it down, and then spread his arms out to lift it forward majestically, fanning. There's also a giant sword on the back, extremely neat. He took a few deep breaths and then exhaled to let his body movements follow those images. It felt good. Se Young rearranged those images. He held the sword out in front of him and mumbled in a more difficult position, that is, pointing the tip of the sword up in the air. Using all his strength, the veins on his face were full of long marks. He gritted his teeth and threw the sword up, hearing a pinching sound as if it had been cut into the air. Having done it, he smiled happily, then turned the tip of the sword 180 degrees to resemble the image inside his body. Who would have thought that as soon as he chained his legs together, all his muscle strength had disappeared. The sword crashed over one of Se-young's shoulders, causing him to feel a terrible pain, and then the familiar roar rang out again, wanting to overthrow him. The whole building, falling face down on the floor, the giant sword flew a few meters away. Se-young felt like he was about to vomit while breathing. He gasped for breath, closed his eyes and wanted to rest. That afternoon, when the sun began to disappear, No Naz looked at the little boy with plasters from his neck to his chest who was avoiding his eyes. She crossed her arms and asked what was going on. Why did she take the initiative to call me like that, and what's with this look? About half an hour ago, No Naz was on a date with a man wearing a luxurious suit and smiled happily. Suddenly I heard the phone vibrate next to me and asked permission. Can I answer the phone for a moment? He politely agreed, but as soon as No Naz picked up the phone, he expressed his displeasure. It's not often that he has a date to see a guy, but who calls at this hour? How the hell did the trembling voice on the other end of the line, help me, make her forget all about the handsome and ugly guys, stood up from the table, bowed her head. Then No Naz turned around and left the cafe. I have something urgent to do, so please let me go first, okay? She looked like she was walking quickly as if the house was on fire and someone was about to die. Finally, standing in the attic room looking at the disheveled boy hiding from her, I asked, did you miss an appointment with a man to come here and see me being naughty like this? His eyes searched all over his body and then stopped on Se-young's bandaged arm. Boza frowned and stared at the boy. What the hell are you doing with your wrists so tight on both sides? Not just one but both sides, and why are the back and waist stuck up everywhere like that? Knowing that she couldn't say anything, Se-young hesitantly told her that she should exercise. The reason sounded convincing. Boza was surprised, put her hands on her hips and bent down to look at the boy in front of her. Then she burst into laughter that was hard to hold back. The girl who hasn't stepped out of the house in 2 years like me but still exercises, was suddenly insulted. Se-young turned around and looked at her older sister who was poking her flat stomach with her index finger. Isn't it strange that even though you exercise so hard that your body becomes weak and weak? Seeing Boza's smile become more and more wild, don't tell me you exercised continuously for 2 hours and then lifted about 100 kilograms of weight. Wanting to tease my brother even more, suddenly Se-young's phone on the floor rang continuously. It said, Happy Real Estate is calling. He tried to get up but before he saw the phone, he saw Boza answer. Hello, yes, this is indeed Mr. Se-young's phone. Me, I already said I was his nurse. You asked me who I was so I said I was a nurse, nothing else. Her voice sounded dirty as she answered no one on the other side. I'm a nurse at Howin University Hospital. My name is Kim Boza, in charge of his regular health checks. Turning back to look at the boy when the other end of the line asked about the screams that the residents downstairs had heard continuously for the past few days, Boza frowned and looked at the boy suspiciously when the other side wanted to know Se-young's health condition. He shook his head repeatedly, indicating that he did not want others to know, so Boza replied that the kid was fine, now very healthy, and mentally quite okay. As soon as she heard the person on the other side asking to give the phone to Se-young, she protested, normally this brat doesn't answer the phone. If there's anything important, just text. But the other end of the line insisted on hearing Se-young's voice, so she brought him closer to tell the boy who was trying to sit up. Please act normal, the real estate office owner is very worried about you. It took all her strength to get up. Se-young tried to say into the smartphone, I'm Se-young. That's all. He lay down on the bed breathing heavily until Boza continued, you heard, right? I'll tell the boy if there's anything. Then she turned off the phone, lost patience and asked Se-young what this was all about. The tenants here say these past few days, you've been screaming so loudly every night. He turned to face inside and said, it's okay, but Boza's eyes never left this kid for a second. In the end, he knew he couldn't hide it so he told the truth and half-truths. He just felt very suffocated and his heart felt like it was about to explode so he did just that. Boza was about to scold this kid, but suddenly she became silent and thought about the time she fed him spoonfuls of rice to keep him alive on the hospital bed of Howin Hospital, and used so many empty words. Even scolded him, but he didn't have the slightest idea of wanting to live. Many times she felt like giving up and saying something to Se-young, but suddenly he said, "It's okay now, I've calmed down." "Is it true?" After saying that, "You say it's not true." Se-young didn't know how to convince her, so she turned around and said, "I'm going to rest." Behind her was a nurse waving her arms and legs, confused. "Remember to change the bandage yourself, except when moving, do not remove the protective bandage or it will swell." After being told a series of ways to treat the wound, this brat pretended not to listen. Kim Boza was so bored that he didn't bother to talk anymore. She turned around and said, "I know your uncle is upset, so I will come here every Tuesday and Thursday." Saying that, Se-young turned back and asked, "What are you saying?" She kept the boy's shocked voice gently touching her lips and mumbling, "Well, not next week but the week after that, and on Tuesday and Thursday I will come here. You know that's okay." Not letting the boy refuse, she disappeared from this place, slammed the door, leaving behind only the sentence, "I'll come no matter what." Se-young gritted her teeth and wanted to curse so much, I told her there was no need. Not long after he lay down to rest, he heard his building seem to be shaking. Again, there was the sound of a barrel drumming right below the bed, surrounded by trash bags that had been piled up for who knows when. He let out a breath of helplessness, saw the trash bags shaking along with the drum beat, then tilted his head down to look at the foot of the bed and saw the sword lying horizontally. There was no movement at all, but the drums sounded extremely clear and mature. Maintaining that position, he sighed in annoyance and finally reached into the hilt of his sword and pulled it out onto the bed. In general, it was extremely heavy. The young man tried his best to pull the sword out from under the bed, threw it on the mattress, and then had to stop for about 2 seconds because of the sharp pain spreading from his wrist to his whole body. He still wanted to reach out and touch the sword, but he had to pant for a few more breaths. At that time, the pain turned to awareness. It was trembling to the point that it was difficult to control. Suddenly, there was a male voice that sounded like he was laughing in Se-young's head. "Great job. Good start. If you don't fall you won't know how to stand up." Terrified, Se-young turned his head around to see who was talking, but clearly there was no one in the room except him. But why does this voice sound so familiar? The voice continued to ramble. When he was young, every time he fell, he would feel pain. When he grew up, when he fell, he would only feel embarrassed. He scratched his head and wanted to know what this voice was all about. It didn't explain what it was or where it came from, but kept saying it, giving Se-young a headache. The way to become stronger is very simple. Pick up your sword and run, then swing your sword until you're exhausted, that's all. He listened but told him to follow and he would be flattered. Giving up the bed for the huge sword, Se-young fell down in the middle of a pile of trash and thought, "What did that voice tell me to swing the sword for? Do you really get stronger by doing that?" He sat up like a zombie, looked back and forth, then decided something was too difficult, so he googled it. My hand was bandaged but my typing speed didn't decrease at all. He typed the 3 words, "double-handed sword," on the sword and then clicked to take a look. Seeing a series of articles and topics discussed online appeared before my eyes. So I'm not the only one researching this issue? The most prominent thing is a title that says, "Complete the sword, training within 4 months," and the owner is filled with training clips for all 4 months. Se-young realized that it was a Korean man and opened his eyes to look. Unexpectedly, all of his movements were exactly the same as what Se-young had whispered in his mind. He practiced how to swing the sword exactly like someone practicing the double-handed sword for 4 months, but his movements when imitating the image in his head seemed even smoother than the person in the clip. Feeling so fake, he widened his eyes and looked back and forth, then used both hands to clasp his baggy pants legs, then turned around to look at the sword lying alone on the bed. Se-young thought it seemed like he had done the same, but now it hurt to do it anymore. His waist and hips were stiff, and he had no strength to hold this sword again. Yet for some reason, at this moment, Se-young's gaze seemed to be drawn to the sword. His black eyes stared and he seemed to see the whole universe opening up right before his eyes. A few days later, Ms. Boza came back to change his bandages and mumbled wonderingly, "Why did that happen?" "It takes about 3 weeks for an injury like this to heal, but in just a few days I was already cured, so I hid it from my sister." "Some kind of elixir, right?" But he didn't see this kid answer and instead lay down on the bed. Boza turned around and said goodbye. "I'm going. Now that I can walk, don't be subjective." He waved his hand and said goodbye, making her angry and wanted to turn around and punch this kid, gritting her teeth and repeating, "If you can walk, don't be subjective," then close the door and leave the attic room. After waiting a few minutes, seeing everything around him being quiet, he thought to himself that she was gone, right? That must be it, so I sat up on my bed, shook my wrists, and thought to myself, Ms. Boza said it would take more than 3 weeks to get rid of him, but now my wrists have the strength to hold them again. It's so fast. Showing the strength of the male lead is here and nowhere else. From the day he heard the voice in his head, Se-young became familiar with it. He went to pull out the sword he hid under the chair, put it on his skinny back to drag him out of the room. Tell yourself the voice from the memories sounds terrible like a ghost, but it never stops speaking in Se-young's head. Now that voice is asking a stupid question, don't you dare run out? Dragging the sword outside was so damn tiring, I didn't know what I was running for. Stepping out onto the terrace, I saw the tip of the sword dragging on the ground until it was in the right position before I put both hands on the hilt. Using all his strength, the young man used his front leg to throw the sword upward, but it had barely reached 90 degrees before he felt his strength run out. The tip of the sword hit the rooftop floor with a loud sound and he let out a sigh of dissatisfaction. It was too heavy, he was dead tired. First, just train your physical strength and muscles. Who knows how much this demon sword weighs? Looking at the door out of the rooftop that had been closed for many years, Se-young thought to herself that if she wanted to run, she would have to show her face outside. What kind of street is this? I haven't even shown my face to the lower floor in the past 2 years. Looking back and thinking about it makes me feel sick. The young man decided that he didn't have the strength to run now, so he would leave it for later, and next time he would definitely run. Holding the sword again, he wanted to raise it again and asked himself, in the memory he had from the previous day, he was a 12-year-old boy. How could he be able to lift a sword and run continuously for nearly an hour? Is that a watch? I'm not sure who I am in the strange man in my memory, but he keeps listening to the mantra, eat then run again. Dwang's eyes were determined, an idea just flashed through Se-young's head. He looked for 2 belts to connect them to the 2 parts of the sword and then tightened a piece of red fabric to wear both parts on his back. Finally, a device was created to carry the sword across the body without having to use the hands. Exhaling to speculate, Se-young thought to herself, how many push-ups did I do in the past? It seems like I can't even do 30. Now, just carrying the sword on my body makes me tremble so much that my legs can't stand it. His head began to spin, calculating if he hadn't exercised in a long time and had to carry a sword, would he be able to do about 10 push-ups now? You have to try it to find out. The young man put his hands on the rooftop floor and before even lowering his body, he felt like he was shaking like a broken washing machine. It's all over the cage, I'm already tired to death. Okay, let's try a demo. The young man tensed his body and mumbled number 1, but why did number 1 take so long? He hadn't even gone deep yet but he saw a terrible trembling from his muscles transmitting a protest. He hit his face straight on the rooftop floor and let out a loud howl and then just lay there for 3 points. Green beans, he said he was about to get 2 but in reality he didn't even get half of them. The fishing buoy is up in the sky. Lifting her flat stomach, Se-young thought to herself that this was enough for the first day. Who would have thought that when he saw his stomach, it would make a gurgling sound like he was protesting, so the young man temporarily stopped practicing. Go inside and lightly hoe 3 to 4 boxes of instant noodles plus tteokbokki and everything. Just after 1 session, he felt his stomach growling. He sat up and told himself that he would eat a lot of rice. When the sun set, he put the sword on his back with determination to try something new. He exhaled and aimed for the rooftop door that had not been opened for a long time, so he had to run. Now there probably won't be many people passing by in this area anymore. Right now, there was no one on the 4th floor. He thought he had to run up the stairs first because it was very dangerous outside. Not to mention the young man also carried a huge sword behind his back. One step down the stairs was a shaky step. He thought he would run until he was tired, but after only taking 10 steps, he felt himself falling like trees in the wind. Breathing in and out a few times, heaving and puffing, Se-young felt that after only going down 1 floor, her body was about to break in half because she couldn't control her strength when the tip of the sword touched the stair railing. The young man tumbled a few times down the stairs below, so without having to step, he still finished part of the stairs with the fishing buoy pointing up into the sky. It hurt so much, he clenched his teeth and felt tears welling up in his eyes, then tried to turn himself upside down. The taste is indescribable, so I decided to run at all costs, at all costs. Just like that, Se-young carried the sword up and down and up with his heavy breaths. He kept counting 1, 2, 3, 4 and then 4, 3, 2, 1. Finally, he returned to the rooftop and shouted loudly, signaling that he had finished what he set out to do. Putting his hands on his trembling thighs, he silently thought that he had just finished 4 rounds and was exhausted, tears, snot, and drool flowing everywhere. If we have to practice to the point of exhaustion, will the 8 haunting faces in our old dreams disappear? He felt like they were still weighing heavily on his mind. Then the image of his parents burning themselves in the square came back to Se-young's mind. He was angry, he bitterly gritted his teeth, then tightened the homemade belt on his shoulder and turned away, determined to do it again. A few weeks later, on the 1st floor of the apartment building, a pile of trash appeared overnight, making it seem as if the entire neighborhood's trash had gathered here. The owner of that pile of trash stayed in the attic, pretending not to know, sleeping until the sun rose, still snoring. Se-young only woke up when the phone next to him vibrated. Now he has gotten used to this lightning sword being next to him, and now he even hugs it to sleep like a teddy bear. He groaned a few times tiredly, and as soon as he woke up, he felt his stomach gurgling with hunger. Since throwing away all the trash, Se-young has returned to cooking like a normal person. He cooks and eats, but why does he feel hungry? Even when cooking alone, the dishes and chopsticks can be piled up into a small pile. After eating, Se-young went back to the terrace to practice push-ups with the sword on his back. However, now he went down and up with more force than before because his arms were showing muscle to help him do push-ups. To number 70. He counted from 71 to 74 and then 76. Sweat poured out on his arm, which seemed to have increased in size compared to when he started. By the time he reached 98, he already saw his mother. The young man still tried to add 99 and finally 100 before falling to the ground and lying down. I'm so tired, practicing every time is like torture, but in the past 4 weeks, Se-young has never stopped for a single day. Suddenly there was a familiar whisper in his ear. The more he thought, the stronger his skin and muscles would become. So the young man sat up immediately, propped his sword on the ground and listened to the other person's teachings. In enthusiasm we find stability, in suffering we find joy. He thought it was right, he had to continue, he couldn't let any more time pass. It was dark, outside the house with few passers-by. Se-young's footsteps were running loudly on the familiar stairs. Still carrying the sword, but her body had regained balance and was no longer as crooked as before. He ran down a flight of stairs without stopping. When he ran up, his steps were still as loud and powerful as before. By the time he slid to the upper floor after completing the whole thing, Se-young's sweat poured out like a shower. He knows he has completed 8 floors, but what happens after that? Glancing at the sword behind him as if asking for its opinion, Se-young pulled it out. Now with just one hand he can lift the sword higher than 90 degrees. But to swing this thing smoothly, he must use to both hands. He tightened his grip on the hilt of the sword and heard the other person's voice whispering, gently swinging the sword until he reached 100 strokes before stopping. Just straighten it up, do it slowly but with quality, slow enough to make anyone watching it yawn, as long as it's slow and in the right order. Se-young listened to the other person's words and absolutely did not let the tip of the sword vibrate. His eyes never blinked as the sword passed by very slowly but steadily. Sweat poured out like a bath, but his arms never stopped. Hearing the other person ask, "Why did you have to go to this extent? Did he ask for that reason in return?" Continuously swinging the sword without stopping, I don't know how many dozen times it has been swung. He heard the voice on the other side ask faintly, "What is your goal?" Never thought about her goal when exercising, but now when a question arises in front of her, Se-young can clearly answer, "Revenge. I want revenge," sitting in front of a white screen. Se-young's mind erased the scene of the village's destruction in blazing fire. This thing looks like some place from ancient times where a lot of people died. At the same time as the image from the passerby's clip of his parents burning themselves on the Lotus Square, the question from the person inside Se-young's head continuously urged, "What is your goal?" He sat on his knees in front of the screen, sobbing, just like the image of the stranger in the past hugging his loved one and crying his eyes out in the middle of the burning village. The goal at that time and now is only one, the two words, revenge. Another terrible dream had just arrived. Se-young opened his eyes to see the light of the electric light falling expressionlessly on his tear-filled face. Reaching up and sitting up, seeing a few drops of water running down her shirt, Se-young quickly wiped them away. The sadness that had just appeared immediately turned into hatred and hatred. Outside on the terrace were Kim Bose's high heels tiptoeing close to his door. "Once I got here, I took out my phone and texted the kid, 'Do you remember that today is test day? We'll meet in an hour.'" Then he smiled happily to himself, clearly arriving at the door and was going to reenact the song she texted by mistake like before. Unexpectedly, hearing the sound of the lock clicking, Kim Bose was startled and thought he was a thief. In front of her was a disheveled boy staring at her through his messy hair. Suddenly she felt embarrassed and asked, "How did you know I was here?" The boy replied with a very unrelated sentence, "I want to live more responsibly." So suddenly there was a loss of joy, but normally Se-young always makes Bose unhappy. Her pouting look made the boy sigh and later he had to take a routine test. First, measuring blood pressure, then Bose asked, "How is your hand?" Still giving the old answer, he said it was a bit uncomfortable. Causing Bose to get annoyed and call out both his full name and, "Hey talk Se-young, you. Me and Dr. Nana have discussed it before but this time is different, right? Seriously tell the boy that the ligaments in his arms and legs are fine, but what about his back?" Yet Se-young still replied nonchalantly, still a bit uncomfortable, making her almost angry and bored with the nurse. What an obnoxious boy, in short, now. She sat up and pointed at Se-young, wanting to know what he was planning. "The doctor just said that now my body has nothing to worry about anymore." As expected, when it came to this matter, Se-young expressed a little concern so she asked, "What should I do? From now on I won't be able to skip school?" She kept talking without noticing when Se-young's right hand clenched tightly. "How can a 17-year-old like me go back to 8th grade? I'll become an uncle in my class. If I go to school, go to a good school. Make new friends, don't let yourself be bullied. Who will bully me?" As he was talking, he suddenly felt the boy approaching him. Bose's voice got stuck in his throat when he saw Se-young so close to him with such a strange look. He looked at the nurse without blinking, telling her not to go to school, with an extremely unusual attitude that made Bose stunned for a moment. She asked what was going on, but the other party still replied with only one question, "Did you just hear that?" Calling Tak Se-young's full name in front of him, he was extremely wary, afraid that she would force him to go to school. Suddenly the nurse sat up and screamed, "Since when are you so tall? Before, you weren't even 1 meter 6 tall, your sister was 1 meter 68 tall. Now she's even taller than me. Hey wait a minute, stand properly." Correcting Se-young's standing posture, Bose looked at him like a creature and wondered why she only knew about it now. Looking down at his muscles again, "Just now I noticed. He's been exercising lately. He's suddenly grown taller. It's true that children grow so fast." But it was very strange, she was about to touch someone but unexpectedly touched the boy's stiff muscles, so she reached out and massaged his 2 thighs. With eyes just like an old sister coveting the kids, Bose chuckled and asked, "Have you become a muscular man?" In the afternoon, when the nurse returned, he had time to practice with the sword on the rooftop. If he was determined to become strong, he had to have overwhelming strength. That voice is like telling Se-young everyday stories. Small things will distinguish the strong and the weak in the crowd. He swung his sword according to each person's word to differentiate between high and low. It seems like the sky, the ground and the sun are different things, but no, they are all one. So there is no need to fight for dominance. He rotated the large sword vertically in front of him. Now my muscles are strong enough to comfortably lift this sword up and down. Thinking back, Se-young himself now has an indomitable commitment, the blessing of the sword combined with the essence of faith after a very long time practicing with this lightning sword. The indomitable oath was obtained by training his body to the point of exhaustion, and was also the first strength that Se-young gained by swinging this sword 10,000 times in each hand without stopping. Finally able to obtain the blessing of the sword, then with those two things in his possession, the essence of faith, one of the most difficult to find powers, was produced in the body. Those three things may sound strange, but they are things that Se-young remembered from the memories she had from day one. He wondered if that was his memory or not. It's also possible that if that's the case, then his current level is nothing compared to his past self. He needs more. Every day Se-young feels the urge to find more strength for himself, so now he only has one thought. He must practice more. Time passed slowly until a year later. The central city remained unchanged like that day. Everyone passing by the shopping malls raised their heads to watch the news because today is one of the country's most important days, the day a new president was successfully elected. Above the words, Jang Sung-chul, speaking after being elected as the country's 21st president, he is swearing, promising, and ensuring that he will achieve the people's expectations. On Seoul's train stations, people hung signs congratulating him on becoming president. All news stations that day reported Jang Sung-chul saying that from now on he would represent the party's ideals against anyone who intended to oppose him. After speaking on television, Sung-chul approached and shook hands with a former subordinate. He laughed, "Ha ha, you became president to contribute to this country, it's all just the beginning." Jang Sung-chul used to be a member of the Barunjong law firm and was elected the 21st president, so many people were excited to come. While we were chatting happily, suddenly a subordinate came over and whispered that department head Lee of Sinjin Group was on the other end of the line. As soon as I picked up the phone, I heard Mr. Jang's congratulations. Sung-chul was very happy, thanked the person on the other end of the line and invited him to a family gathering and all. The most important thing is that the children have had to work hard in America for so long, and when it's time to return, the sincere statements clearly fall into Se-young's hands. Like many other presidents, as soon as he became president, Sung-chul declared that he would not ignore any support and increasingly raised people's expectations. After saying a few more rude words to the president of Sinjin Group, he hung up, just as the secretary came in to ask, "Is Soo-young coming back soon?" Hearing his daughter's name, he immediately smiled and nodded yes. She had suffered a lot and the children had grown up. The secretary worked with him for a long time and kept congratulating him. The president had worked hard and finally got the desired result. He confidently teaches people that there is a saying that after the rain comes sunshine, so the children have gone through difficulties, so we parents need to join forces to make things like this happen. Isn't that true? Seeing the secretary nod yes, he raised his face to the sky and laughed cheerfully. When power is concentrated in the hands like this, that's when Sung-chul feels he can do more. No one can stop him and his family from achieving what they want. After that, a few days at Incheon International Airport was crowded with people, and at the international exit that day, there appeared a few figures wearing bold black clothes, so there were much fewer people, all to protect the three figures. Behind, the sound of shoes clacking on the tiled floor. As soon as a girl with blue hair walked between two young men, she heard someone calling Yoojin, and Suho and Junhyuk as well. In front of them were three young men waving their hands vigorously, pretending to be very close. It's true that they all really knew each other. At first, she was a bit skeptical about the change in appearance, but then she slowly read out the names Hee-yun, Chong-soo and Da-hun, right? Some are indifferent, others are excited to see a long-time old friend return home. so it is necessary to welcome each intense excitement. They smiled and greeted each other. It's been a long time since we've seen each other, but there wasn't much to say to each other. After the social greeting, suddenly the atmosphere became awkward and Hee-yeon asked the blue-haired girl, "Why don't Soo-hyuk and Soo-young come home with you?" Hearing those two names, Yoojin suddenly felt dirty. She said she didn't know. Soo-young wanted to go to Japan. She said it was to refresh her mind, and did Soo-hyuk know anything? Mentioning her friend's name, she acted jokingly, but Jun-hyuk didn't care much. He just felt annoyed. He's been relaxing for 2 years and still has so much to do. It's just the fault of his henchmen. So each person quickly left the arrivals area of the airport. The four of them walked and talked while the rest, Jun-hyuk and Chang-soo, deliberately walked backwards to talk better. Frowning his eyebrows under his white hair, Jun-hyuk asked in a low voice, "Have you found out anything yet?" After hearing what he said, he immediately raised his hand to rub his shoulder and said it was good. Thinking that was the end, Chang-soo's sinister smile spread across his lips. The blonde guy lowered his head and whispered, "Hey, what are you planning, right?" Immediately received a disgusting smile from the guy next to him, the kind of brand that has never disappeared for many years. He said of course it was. Why did we end up like this? Auntie's voice rang out from the other end of the phone, very worried. "Se-young, are you really planning on not going to school?" Hearing him say no, I want to convince him more. You can't keep doing this forever. It's just that Se-young isn't ready to go back to school, so Auntie doesn't know what else to say. Or should I go to Auntie? She is far away in America and the world around her is currently too scary for Se-young. He didn't say it out loud but just refused. Knowing that she couldn't advise her nephew for the time being, she said in a low voice to the other side, "Sorry," afraid that if she pushed him too hard, he would think bad things. After saying a few more words, Hyunjin was about to hang up, but because she was worried about Se-young, she called and urged her. He closed his eyes, pulled out the sword that had been his friend all year, and stroked it for a few moments like a pet. Heart filled with hatred, Se-young silently chanted, "You just wait, then I will crush all of you into dust." In front of his building, a pair of shiny leather shoes suddenly appeared. A man in a suit looked up and reported to someone on the other end of the line. "Yes, I'm here." He almost doesn't come out. I've sent people to watch around this building during the day but he still doesn't show up. According to what he said, he tried mobilizing food and delivery shippers and staff to check other meter readings but still couldn't verify anything. Inside this building, if not told in advance, no one would know that the owner is living here. The expensive car passing from the airport onto the highway echoed Jun-hyuk's surprised voice. "What do you mean, he never leaves the house?" Hearing Chang-soo seem to be the truth, Jun-hyuk still didn't believe it, kept complaining and asking for his latest photo, but he never went out to ask for the photo. Chang-soo asked angrily, but all Jun-hyuk had in his hands right now was the image of Se-young still weak as a skeleton at the hospital. The bastard refused to go to school or even go out. "I don't know how it is living now." Chang-soo asked the silver-haired boy next to him, "Do you think we should tell you guys to break into his house? Just kick down the door and drag it out and beat it in one go." Looking at Jun-hyuk's bewildered face, Chang-soo vaguely asked, Isn't it funny that you made your friend laugh like he heard something interesting?" Holding onto Chang-soo's neck, Jun-hyuk laughed happily as if he had just seen a comedy and then saw his blonde friend's face. He turned away and explained, "No, to do that, you have to at least be at the same level." "Like Soo-hyuk. Why suddenly mention him?" Chang-soo asked in surprise, then saw the silver-haired guy's cunning eyes and asked, "Do you think Soo-hyuk only went to Japan to play?" Of course he didn't know, so he opened his eyes and asked, making Jun-hyuk extremely excited and grin. Then his face gradually distorted into a conspiratorial form because that guy Lee Soo-hyuk was invited to Japan to work. "It's Yakuza." "What? I thought it only existed in movies." Seeing Chang-soo's panicked face, Jun-hyuk liked it very much, slowly explaining it, and Soo-young knew a few friends in America whose parents were Yakuza. While boarding the plane, Soo-hyuk said, "I have to give that bastard a gift first." That's also Jun-hyuk's favorite sentence. Who among the guys here wouldn't want to teach that guy a lesson? That night, when she opened social media, What Se-young saw was the image of her old bullies gathering after returning home. He held the blue phone in his hand so tightly that it was about to break. Each line below was filled with joy as it entered his eyes. We finally met. Hey Soo-hyuk, Soo-young. The day we meet each other will come soon. Placing the phone firmly down, he used both hands to zoom in on the photo and glanced down with a gloomy expression that looked like he was from the underworld. There is someone here waiting for you. At Narita International Airport in Japan, two Koreans appeared smiling and talking to each other, thinking they would have to wait another year or two before being able to return home. Who would have thought that Soo-young's father had just become president and had a great influence in changing the situation? Opposite that couple was another couple smiling as if they had known each other for a long time. It was Soo-hyuk and Soo-young who had just landed at the airport. The car was waiting. They now met familiar faces to continue talking about stories that had many details to discuss. Lee Soo-hyuk is the son of Lee Jo-jang, chairman of Shijin Group, one of the people extremely close to the father of Jang Soo-young, the current 21st president of South Korea. The long limousine car that takes people out of the airport is designed to have a separate room for 4 people to sit facing each other and talk. They said they didn't want to waste time, so they started talking about the thing that everyone looks forward to every time they return home. Da-hun spoke first. Since the news of Soo-hyuk and Soo-young coming to Japan was released, my brother has arranged everything. With a bright smile, Soo-hyuk said thank you, but the guy with the rice roll in the corner laughed and said I'm the one who needs to thank you, right? Its narrow eyes glanced back and forth full of lust, shining at Soo-young. Who would have imagined that I would get to know Soo-young, the daughter of the current Korean president, while studying abroad in the US? Suddenly hearing about me, she was very happy to thank me. I won't forget what you helped me with. Hearing the beauty say that, she smiled triumphantly. That's what friends have to do. My father, the head of the beauty club, is extremely concerned about these things. Something that everyone knows is something. All 4 of them looked at each other, each with their own expression. Then Soo-young spoke first. If everything's okay, we'll leave here tomorrow. Da-hun suggested that why not stay here and relax, then come back to Korea when needed. The girl sitting next to her was just waiting to burst out giggling, making Soo-young feel something strange. The 2 of them burst out laughing. Why do you look so surprised? It's so cute. The veiled words made Soo-young extremely dissatisfied. Tell me what you want to say, Mom, why did you call us here? He hummed and said, there are a few people already in Busan waiting for the signal to come to work. We can meet them anytime. I see, So-young wants to know what this brat is planning, but it's nothing special. He smiled and said, I told them that you want to clean up the mess yourself, so for now, you can just consider these people as your subordinates to give orders to. Hearing that, Soo-young burst into laughter. You're so tired, why didn't you say that from the beginning, and even said it openly? At that moment, the phone in Soo-hyuk's pocket vibrated. Who knew the exact time he would land at the airport to make that call? He pulled out his phone, glanced at it for less than 2 seconds, and his eyebrows were furrowed in anger, making Soo-young next to him take a look and see. Just reading it, the girl was just as irritated as her friend. Someone used an unsaved number, texted jokingly saying, I've played with that thing before. I'm bored waiting for you guys, sorry. Okay. That night on a deserted street because it was midnight, 2 thugs were driving a car near Se-young's house, cursing at each other with dissatisfaction about having to go to work at this hour. The prankster told the guy with the hair to be quiet. Whatever he did had to be gentle. It would only make him crazy and curse. Why the hell do you think you and I were sent to do this? Dealing with a kid who hasn't even finished middle school, do you think there's anything special about it? Pointing at a random building on the side of the road, the guy with the dirty banner called out the names of his accomplices. Look, there are so many ordinary people living here. 5 minutes until 12 o'clock and they have turned off all the lights. Okay, around here there are only the headlights of this black car. They hadn't made a plan yet, just now starting to think about what they should do. But the guy with the hair quickly leaned out of his chair, wanting to go alone right away. Then he left the kid who still didn't understand why. Why don't the 2 guys act at the same time? He leaned out the car window as if he had to explain to an idiot. Why would he just beat a middle school kid and both of them have to go? But that's not very good because it's a duty. It's both of their jobs. So talkative, the guy with the hair went crazy and roared at his accomplice. Do you think I still need people to watch when I beat that kid? The more I thought about it, the more bitter I became. I didn't know why I was sent to deal with that brat. That guy insisted on taking that middle school kid back.